Welcome to the Adapter's Advantage, the podcast that shares insider stories about breakthrough moments that lead to success. Get ready for an inspiring conversation about adapting to change from Allego, the all-in-one sales enablement platform built for success in a hybrid world. Let's dive right in.
Hi, I'm Mark Magnacca, and I want to welcome you to the next episode of the Adapter's Advantage podcast. Today, I'm excited to have as my guest Ben Zander, the conductor of the Boston Philharmonic Orchestra. Some of you may recognize Ben from his TED Talk, which is one of the top TED Talks of all time, viewed by more than 20 million people. Before we jump right in, let me read a little bit of his background to help set the stage for you. Since 1979, Benjamin Zander has been the conductor of the Boston Philharmonic, and he's known around the world as both a guest conductor and a speaker on leadership. And he's been known to do both in a single performance. He uses music to help people open their minds and create joyful harmonies that bring out the best in themselves and their colleagues. His provocative ideas about leadership are rooted in a partnership with Rosamund Zander, with whom he co-wrote The Art of Possibility. A leading interpreter of Mahler and Beethoven, Zander is known for his charisma and unyielding energy, and for his brilliant pre-concert talks. The London Sunday Times said it best: he's arguably the most accessible communicator about classical music since Leonard Bernstein. Zander moves audiences with his unbridled passion and his enthusiasm. So let's get started. When people ask you the question, so what do you do? What do you say?
Well, if somebody asked that question, and I don't remember that anybody ever did, but if somebody asked me that question, I would say I'm a teacher. Fundamentally, I'm a teacher. I feel that everything I do, whether it's conducting or rehearsing or speaking or coaching or interacting with people or answering emails or whatever it is, it always comes under the heading of teaching. And I think teaching is the sacred role that we have as human beings. We all have that role, whether we have a small dog or small children or a classroom full of people or an orchestra or a company. So in a sense, everything we do is teaching. And it's interesting that the word maestro, which is the word that they use for conductors, which sounds very grand, and very important and male, actually simply means teacher. And every elementary school teacher in Italy is maestro or maestra. So I think that keeps us from getting too grandiose and too self-important, standing on a podium looking down at our charges. Rather, our role is to illuminate, to engage, to teach, to enable people to be the best they can be. And I see that as not only a daily task, but literally the task of every minute of the day.
So let's pivot to the TED Talk for a minute, because that was my first exposure to you. I have spent much of my adult life studying communication experts. I've been fascinated with the topic. And the part that was so amazing to me when I got to meet you in person was I wasn't sure if that was just the capturing of lightning in a bottle, if you will, that moment in California in front of that audience, like if somehow everything just conspired and it was magic, or if you were someone that could do that on an ongoing basis. And when we met, I saw that, wow, you do it over and over again. My question is, what do you think it is with over 20 million views about that performance, that video from 2008 that has resonated with so many people around the world? And I read recently, and is a huge hit in China now too. What is it?
Well, of course, it's different for every person, and I wouldn't presume to know what it is that struck the chord with that person. But I'll tell you something. If I do this, let me just sit for a moment at the piano. If I do this. I would say there isn't a single human being that isn't touched by that.
Yeah.
after a while. And you've got to put them in a frame of mind so they're not making a lot of noise or thinking about winning a game or something like that. You've got to put them in a calm state of mind, and then maybe talk about an environment of listening. But then you do this. And all of that is one note. That's all it is, just that, with different chords underneath.
Yeah.
And the miracle of classical music is, or music, you could say, is that it is really universal, because there isn't any language that stands in the way of that. Every single human being. So one of the reasons that talk is so successful is because of the music. Another reason, I think, is the premise of that talk is that everybody loves classical music. They just haven't found out about it yet. And that is such a profound idea. It's such a grand notion that there is something in human beings that connects us all, and that there is nobody who's left out. All you have to do is to gather them up and help them and point out a few things, and they'll find out. Because what's so miraculous about this, it goes down to and every human being, if they hear this, feels, everybody feels that.
And I can feel it, and I'm not even in the same room. Like I can feel, I'll call it goosebumps, like emerge in my body. And
so
when
none of the other TED Talks have that language to play with.
Right? So I never thought, I mean, that's a big idea, what you just said. And Ben, you've talked about this, the notion that music generates emotions that release the human experience. I loved the way you said that, and you just demonstrated it. So my question is, when you think about engaging people, realizing that you can't always use music to do that, what is it in your mind, having spent so much of your life doing this, how does music transcend in a way that even words don't, to connect with us in our bodies, that does have this release that that almost no other medium has?
Yeah, it's a kind of a mystery, but it never fails. Look, let's say you're in a gloomy mood and you're feeling down and you're feeling put upon, and suddenly how can you resist that? You can't say, no, because Beethoven, who was going completely deaf at that point and was suffering illness and all sorts of difficulties, he still was able to say, and it's a very simple thing. This is a C major chord, and there are 3 C major chords. They rise up, and as they go up, they make you feel more energized and more excited and more willing to take on the world. And the job of the performer is to make sure that you don't play it, but you play it with fire and with energy and with direction and with shape, and so like that. And then everybody gets wound up and feels the excitement and the intensity of it and so on. It's a wonderful language because it speaks immediately. It doesn't go through the brain, it goes directly through the molecules.
My co-founder, who attended your first youth orchestra concert, described the power of this music when he said he found it amazing how many people with their mask on at the start of the concert, not really sure what to expect, spontaneously started weeping all over the concert, really describing what you just talked about, that somehow the music just went right through the molecules to their heart and not through their brain.
Well, I don't think anybody quite understands how it works or why it works. And in a way, that's good. There's certain things we shouldn't understand.
Yeah.
Music is a mystery, why it has the effect. I just want to just play a phrase for a moment. This is the Adagietto from the Fifth Symphony of Gustav Mahler. And he wrote it as a message, as a love letter to his wife-to-be, his girlfriend, his fiancée. He wrote, can you imagine receiving that message from somebody you love?
Yeah.
And what effect it has? There's no way of explaining why that is so powerful. You can write a poem, you can write an essay, you can speak, you can gesticulate, but nothing compared to these words.
Yeah, no, it's so,
It's amazing. And this is just on the piano, but if you hear it on the orchestra, it's just,
it does. It's, and what's so interesting, Ben, as you say that, and it makes me think about, even for movies, as powerful as the visual sense is for most human beings, and you're watching the movie, at least I know in my own experience, it's the music that gets me. The music is the thing that, so often brings the emotion.
You often don't notice it, in fact. You're affected by it. And the thing that I know, and I know it deeply, is that everybody can be moved. I've never met anybody who could not be moved by music, and that and they often need some help, like I give in the TED talk. But nobody resists it. It's not as if it's 50% or 70% or 81% or no, it's 100% of human beings. Now, if you can say that and state that everybody loves classical music, they just haven't found out about it. That's a statement of possibility. And you don't have to prove it, and maybe you can't prove it, but you can say it. And it's a statement of possibility. It gathers everybody around that proposition, and it's a beautiful way of being. And don't argue with it, because it livens people up. It gets people excited. Nobody wants to argue with that. And I had one very beautiful story. I mean, this is not relevant to our story, but I'll tell it. I was in England and talking to 500 school administrators, and they were all in front of me like this, 500 administrators. There were school heads and the vice heads and the bursars, whatever. And I gave my talk and I played and we sang and everything, and everybody was responding with full of, except for one person. Absolutely no response, nothing. He didn't sing, he didn't laugh at the jokes, no response. So when it was all over, of course, I kept on looking at him, because human beings are like that. We look at him. I had 490 people totally wrapped up in this experience, but one was resisting. So I called Ros, my former wife and lifelong partner, and I said, Ros, she said, how did it go? I said, oh, it was great, except then I told the man, I said, there was one person who didn't respond. And she said, I don't believe it. And I said, Ros, you weren't there. He absolutely did not respond. She said, I don't believe it. And so that night there was a reception, and he was there. So I went up to him and I said, you know, I had an argument with my wife today about you because I said you didn't respond at all to the talk, and she said she didn't believe it. And he said, I'm so sorry. I was having a diabetic attack. And I thought that if I stood up or laughed or anything, I would faint. So, but I loved the talk. It was great.
And she was right again.
Right. Roz was living possibility. In other words, she was living in that model of saying, of course, everybody loves it. It's like everybody loves nature. You know, it's not as if some people say, I don't like flowers. No, they just haven't been brought up close. You know.
It's such a great point that you make here, Ben. And I want to just reference the work that you've done with Roz in your book, The Art of Possibility, because I know that when I first read it, it was definitely a mind expanding book for me. And I will tell you that getting to know you and interact with you, I've seen these principles come to life in a way that, like anything, it needs to be reinforced. But it's been a powerful virtuous circle for me that you see it, you believe in it, you expect it, it happens, and it just sort of builds on itself. So in my mind, this notion of possibility you've demonstrated, it can be in all different parts of our life. The question that I have is, what was the catalyst for someone who was a conductor to write this? And what was the implication as a result of doing it for you?
Well, what happened was, long before the book, I started talking to organizations and corporate groups and leaders about leadership. And it was based on my experience as a conductor, plus Roz's experience as a therapist. And I was out in the world talking to people all the time about possibility, about leadership, about art, about all sorts of things. And one day I gave a talk and a woman came bouncing up on the stage and said, you've got to write a book. I'm from Harvard Business School Press, and we want you to write a book on this subject. And I pointed to Roz and I said, so long as she's included to do the writing. And that's how it happened. It happened after many, many years of being out in the world, teaching, essentially. Again, it's all teaching.
Right.
And I got the opportunity to speak to some very, very powerful people. I was a keynote speaker at the World Economic Forum, for instance, where I spoke to 2,500 of the world's most powerful people. And I was brought in to talk to the president of Portugal and to IBM and all sorts of, because the model that most corporate organizations work on is the hierarchical model of winning and losing, of success and failure, of domination, and that model of top-down leadership. So they bring in sports people and they bring in generals. Now suddenly comes a musician, a symphony conductor, talking not about winning and losing, because you don't win and lose in a symphony orchestra, but talking rather about the power that the conductor has to give power away, to empower others, because the conductor doesn't make a sound. So it's not about hoarding power, it's like spreading it through the orchestra so that the last violinist and the second violinist section feels lifted, energized, excited, inspired, so that he plays the best that he knows how to play. That's the art of leadership through conducting. And that turns out to be a more valuable model for most organizations than the traditional top-down one. Because the top-down one, which was what was used in the conducting world until quite recently, which is fear, you dominate, you follow my will.
Yes.
And that is the model that it was used throughout, the last 75,000 years. Now, suddenly we've embraced and mastered, I think, a new model for leadership, which is to awaken possibility in other people.
Ben, that leads me to seeing you at the concert that night in the private corporate event back in 2011. And I had this unique invitation because I got to see you backstage, and then I got to see you go front stage. And this really helped inform, as we wrote this book, Mastering Virtual Selling, that there's this way of being. And what was interesting is that you interacted with people backstage before the concert, then you delivered the experience and the performance, and then you came backstage and you continued to interact with people and take pictures and chat. And so it was like a continuum. And the takeaway that I had from that was that most salespeople think about what they do from the moment they're in front of the customer until the moment that interaction, whether it's on Zoom or in person, ends. And the takeaway I had was there's all kinds of things that you can do, what we're now calling backstage, things you can do before the concert and things you can do after the concert that can actually make the performance, if you will, more effective. So my question is, for people who don't come from the music world, what have you learned about the importance of backstage activities to support your front stage efforts?
It's interesting you say, what have I learned? It's more an instinctive thing. One of the things I say to conducting students is everything you do matters. Everything. Right? If you raise your eyebrow, it matters. Right? So if everything matters, you don't have to question whether it matters. So every single interaction, every gesture, everything you say, the mood, everything you do affects how the thing is going to unfold. I remember a wonderful moment before a rehearsal. I said to my personnel manager, I said, I really hope it's a great rehearsal. And she said, well, it's entirely up to you. And it's a very good point, because if I come into a rehearsal even slightly dejected or self-absorbed or irritated, I can be sure that the rehearsal is not going to go well. It's going to affect the way they draw the bow across the string. If I come in full of energy and joy and optimism and confidence that they're going to play beautifully, so it comes out. So I know that, and I wouldn't say I learned it, I feel it instinctively, and I think we all have access to that knowledge as a parent or as a friend or as a lover. We know that everything we do affects the other person. It may be a very small thing, but it has an effect. And so being mindful of how we speak, what words we use, how we address people, tone of voice, energy in the body, vitality in the spirit, all those things will have a direct effect on the quality of the music. And I'm so certain about that, I don't even question it.
Well, it's interesting, as you said that, it occurred to me that if you were to be wearing a mask, so much of the expressiveness and the communication from your face, you can't really telegraph that, correct?
Well, I have an agreement with my players that I won't wear a mask. And I do a lot of complicated things in order to make that possible. Because, for instance, the leader of my second violin section has a 7-month-old baby. Right. So, and I'm 83, and she doesn't want to be worried if she comes to rehearsal. So not only have I been double vaccinated and boosted, but also before every single rehearsal, I get a test. Somebody comes to my house and tests me so that we can tell all the people in the orchestra. They can be calm and they can be. But I agree with you that it's very difficult for me to conduct an orchestra of people with masks, because I depend on their reaction. Yes. And I can see their eyes, the mirror into the soul, or the window into the soul. So I can usually tell how people are doing. But it's the whole human face and body is extremely important in communication. And I think the sooner we get over the COVID restrictions, the better it'll be. And I think maybe we've learned some important things. First of all, how important the face and communication is. We miss it. How important it is to be together, to be in groups. how important it is to hear live music as opposed to music over the internet. I started a series of concerts in my driveway, so that people literally in the driveway of my house, and people came from far and wide to sit, of course with masks, but sitting in the driveway listening just to hear live music. It's extremely different than listening to it over the radio or over the internet. And so we've learned, and now here's another thing which I bet you've never thought of. In concerts that have taken place since the COVID time, you never hear a cough in a concert.
No, that's so fascinating.
Silence.
Yes.
Miraculous. I mean, to give a concert which from beginning to end doesn't have a single noise or emotion, nothing.
Yep. You almost wonder how much of it then was like a habit, because some people have like a, you know, and now it's almost like in the COVID time, anyone who coughed, there was this immediate sense of like, uh-oh, right? So people
don't
really
dare to cough anymore, and that's a wonderful thing, because it's often a reflex reaction, and it's why when you get to the end of a movement, everybody coughs. Why do they need to cough at the end of a movement? And now they don't do it. So now we silence. So it's like being in church. It's incredible. So there are all sorts of wonderful things that have happened. And I think most of all, we've learned to value the precious things that we have that are so important for us, and learn to treasure them and defend them and to behave wisely around them and to support them and so on. So I think it actually has brought out, for many people, not for everybody, but for many people, their best qualities, both of generosity and caring and awareness, that we tend to take things for granted.
Mm-hmm. So true. So true. I do want to go back to the eyes just for a moment, though, because I'm thinking about you up there. I'm wearing glasses, and, you know, I'm just imagining from 50 feet away trying to see someone's eyes. Where did you come up with the metric of shining eyes?
I love the way you call it a metric. It's as if it's something mechanical. No, I just noticed that when things were working and the music was going well, people's eyes were shining. So I used that as my way of knowing whether things were going well, rather than some other means, because the other means I've developed is to give people a white sheet of paper on their stands. It's called the white sheet, and they can speak freely to me about anything that they're concerned about or upset about or excited about. And that is a wonderful tool, and some people use it. The only condition for the white sheet is that they sign it. And so I have literally thousands of white sheets. I never throw them away. And I'm going to have to move to a bigger house soon. But anyway, the white sheet is what I call somewhat mischievously asshole protection, because if I say something inappropriate or stupid or demeaning by chance, if I fell into that, which I virtually never do, but if I did, I would hear about it. And I'm sure
so you're getting direct feedback, is your point.
Absolutely. And if I get a wrong tempo, I have one woman in my orchestra who actually isn't even a professional musician, but she's very smart about music. And if the tempo lags a bit, as it sometimes does, you know, you get absorbed with details, and she'll write down tempo too slow, so the players have a means of communicating with me anything that they feel is not working to the best ends of the project, the best means of achieving the result that we want. And that's great. But if they don't write, they still have the shining eyes. And I've developed this very important thing that I will repeat when we have our session, because it's one thing to say it in conversation like this and quite another to say it to everybody. If the eyes are not shining, you get to ask a question: who am I being that the eyes are not shining? Yes. My player's eyes are not shining, my children's eyes are not shining, my wife's eyes are not shining, my customer's eyes are not shining.
Yes.
The only place to look is who you're being yourself. And the only person we can transform is ourselves.
That's so powerful. And that's going to be definitely a theme that I know people are going to love hearing. Um, Ben, we started this conversation with you talking about yourself as a teacher. And yet I read a beautiful line that you said the best review that you ever got wasn't from a music critic, but from your father. What is it that he experienced and what did he say about you?
It was adorable. And he was a wonderfully imaginative man. And he came to a class that I was giving. And it was one of those long master classes, it lasted 3 hours, I think. And he was very old and blind, 94, I think, sitting in a wheelchair. And he listened to the whole class. And in the end, I went over and he said something that to me was the highest accolade that I could receive in my life. He said, "I see you're a member of the healing profession." And it came from the depths of his heart, and it stayed with me all this time. He saw something that was not about teaching musical shape or style or history or anything to do. It was about releasing the full potential, the full spirit, the full expressiveness of the people who were playing. And that's the healing profession. That if we can do that for our students, for our children, for our colleagues, for the people who work for us, to release whatever they have the capacity to give, that's the healing process. And music has a unique power to do that. And to be in music is extraordinary. I have many really extraordinary stories. They're apocryphal, not apocryphal, but they can't be proved, But somebody came the other day and said he wasn't feeling well, and that they thought maybe they should go home. And I said, well, just play the first half of the rehearsal and then go home. And at the end of the rehearsal, 3.5 hours later, he came and said, I'm completely cured. I feel fantastic. What happened? They'd worked hard for 3.5 hours.
Yes.
And they'd play great music.
So it's so wonderful. Well, let me pivot just as we're getting ready to wrap up here. So the pandemic happens and some people aren't sure how to react, but you made the pivot to virtual. What was your experience in the virtual world like? And what have you learned doing a virtual collaboration with conductors from all over the world?
Well, I tell you, I have developed a deep love for and respect for the virtual world that I didn't have before the pandemic. It's been, in some ways, the richest, the most creative, the most rewarding period of my life has been this last year of the pandemic. I had a very bad accident. I was in hospital for several weeks, and I started teaching from my hospital bed, and I started giving talks. I gave a talk to a corporation of leaders of the fashion industry, people who were the CEOs of major fashion houses. I was lying in my bed. And it turned out they were just as moved. And I tell you something very interesting, and this is important for you, for your people. When you give a talk to 1,000 people in a room, you're very small and they are spread out around.
Right.
When you're giving a talk on Zoom, it's you and the other person, and that's it, right?
Yes.
Because your face fills the whole screen, like your face is filling the whole screen now.
Yes.
So the intimacy and the closeness and the impact that you have over the internet actually is much greater than if you're in a room. Now, you miss something. You miss the camaraderie, you miss singing, you miss all the things you can do in a group. But one-on-one has proved to me. Now, what we did with the youth orchestra, very interesting. With the youth orchestra, we couldn't play. You cannot play you can't make music because there's no way of coordinating. And to me, it's ridiculous to try. Mm-hmm. But what we did was we turned all the members of the orchestra into conductors. And every Saturday afternoon for 3 hours, I would be in my home with a video camera filming everything, and they would be spread out all over the world. Actually, there was people in Korea. There was one student watching at 2:30 in the morning. And I taught them conducting. Now, that doesn't mean to be a conductor, but what does it take to be a conductor? You have to know music, you have to know the instrument, you have to know the interpretation, and you have to know leadership. And so we delved into that. It was all turned into film, and Alfonso, who you just met, has turned it into 24 films. It's going on my website, which is coming out this month. It's going to be available to young people all over the world, And then the story of the conductors. One of my former students asked me if I would do a conducting class on Zoom. And I said, how can you teach conduct? There's no music. He said, well, no, you'll find a way. And so I did with one conductor, just like you and I now.
Yes.
Two of us, he would do ba 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 ba, and I would say no, ba 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 ba. So, and then he got 274 conductors signed up to follow this process, and we're all connected now. And when I give a concert, it's sent out live stream to all these people. I mean, it's just unbelievable, and you can't imagine if this pandemic had happened when we didn't have Zoom or we didn't have these connections. It would have been an unmitigated catastrophe. As it turns out, it was an unmitigated breakthrough for humanity. And so we used this opportunity. And for instance, the concert on my driveway, which is in this beautiful garden, was filmed and live streamed around the world. One concert, there were people from 22 different countries listening to music in my driveway in Cambridge. Now, wow, it's right. None of that could have been possible.
Right.
So the thing is, they always say this cliche, if one door closes, another one opens. In every situation, there is no situation that is so bad that it's not open up. It's not open to possibility.
Well, guess what? There's a lot more inquiry happening for me. One of them is when you think about the people that you interact with, and you talk about the concept of you being a teacher, what do you think is the most important skill that people should learn or improve today?
Generosity. I mean, I just invented that this moment. It's not true, but I think if people would take the generous path, always, the world would shift on its axis and we would all be more effective.
And this has been such a wonderful conversation. If people want to learn more about you, what's the best place for them to do that, or where should they go?
Well, I'm very excited by that question because we're just about to launch my website. There's been a website for a long time, but we've just created a new one. It isn't launched yet. But on this website, I say to people, you can either wander about here like in a new town or a museum on your own, but if you want a guided tour, I'll be your guide. And so I take the audience through all the different aspects of my life. There's the Boston Philharmonic, the youth orchestra, what happened in COVID, the possibility world, and I take them through as a guide and tell them what to listen for, which pieces to listen for, give them background information, so that not only will they know more about me, which is not so interesting, they'll know more about themselves, and that is very important.
Now, Ben, I will just tell you one interesting thing that connects the dots that I hadn't fully realized until you explained that, is that at Allego, we believe that the way salespeople will sell in the future is literally having a website like what you just described for every customer, and the salesperson acts as the guide, the way you just described, helping curate the experience and sharing the relevant information and a little background to help the buyer understand. So once again, you're leading the way here of what we see as the future.
Great, beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Mission accomplished.
You've been listening to The Adapter's Advantage, a podcast from Allego. Stay connected by subscribing to the show at allego.com/podcast, leaving us a rating and comment, and sharing episodes you love. That helps us bring you more conversations about breakthrough moments that lead to success. Thanks for listening. Until next time, remember that one new idea can change your life.